Who was the best player in the NBA this year? That's everyone's favorite question, and in the next 20-something minutes, I'll try to answer this by comparing a season's worth of film breakdown and mountains of data on the league's top players. But first, the criteria. To me, best is about how much a player helps a team win a championship, and that's a pretty important distinction to make because it means that lifting really poor teams to average heights is essentially useless. Instead, my approach to this question focuses on skills that scale up or maintain value alongside better and better teammates, and as a result of this, I value skills like shooting, passing, and defense more than some. My goal with any list that I publish is less about the list and more about sharing information and rationale so you can incorporate that into your own rankings. It's also really hard to perfectly pinpoint a player's value, so instead I'll emphasize ranges that are reasonable to me. In other words, if I hold all the players on the list constant, how much higher or lower could I see this player based on his uncertainties? Health also matters to me, but we'll account for that later. Let's start by assuming all players are at full health for the season and the playoffs, and based on that, who gives a random team the best chance to win a title? Before we answer that, I'm really excited to tell you about this video's sponsor. Having sponsors is a huge deal for this channel. It means I can do this full time, and it's a point of emphasis for me to work with reputable companies that you'll find valuable or helpful in your life. So today's sponsor is the Dollar Shave Club. I used to think Dollar Shave Club was just razors, but they've actually got all kinds of gentlemanly grooming products, from shampoos to hand creams to, and this one's the most important, baby wipes. Look, the way I see it, if you're really a gentleman, be gentle with the hinterlands. The idea is that they have you covered in the bathroom, and it's a subscription concept, so it's really convenient. You choose what products you want delivered and how often you want them delivered, and this way you'll never run out or have to do that scramble to the store thing. The more you add to your delivery, the more you save, and yes, I got a deal for you. Go to dollarshaveclub.com/thinkingbasketball and get any of their starter kits for just $5. The shave starter comes with their best blade and 1-ounce tubes of prep scrub, shave butter, and post-shave dew. There's an oral care starter for the pearly whites and a shower starter with trial-size shampoo, face cleanser, and my favorite, the lavender body wash. dollarshaveclub.com/thinkingbasketball. Okay, now it's countdown time. Starting at number 10, I have Nikola Jokic, who I profiled in detail earlier this year. By the way, I'll link any supporting content at the top of the screen and in the description box below if you want additional analysis on a player. In that video, I break down why I think Jokic is the best passer in the league, which, paired with good scoring, makes him a strong offensive centerpiece. To put his offensive prowess into perspective, here's a list of similar playoff performers in the three-point era. Notice he's the only big man of that group that includes the great point guards and ball-dominant engines in league history. His passing and decent outside shooting would fit well with stronger players or a more ball-dominant teammate, although he's not a good defender at the center position, which makes him a touch harder to fit into high-end lineups. He's hurt by subpar lateral movement and mediocre rim protection. Although, I do view his defense as a slight positive. He has great hands and makes strong defensive reads and can string together good defensive possessions with great effort. This shows up in his impact metrics where, for instance, Jokic is a solid positive on defense in PIPM, and that's the reason he places near the top of the league in these stats. While his regular season impact metrics were quite strong, it's his playoff metrics that really shine, and by the way, Denver held its playoff opponents slightly below their regular season offensive rating, reinforcing the idea that Jokic isn't exactly a liability on D. He could easily have been at number 9 for me. I'm splitting hairs choosing between him and the next player, and I can even see him at number 8, but I'm not ready to move Jokic's offense into that rarefied superstar air yet that would push him into the top 7. In the 9th spot is Paul George, who was blazing this year until he injured his shoulder at the end of February. He was 8th in the league in scoring rate at that point and sized up well against similar wings. Here he is versus Kevin Durant and Kawhi Leonard. George is an explosive scorer in this vein, although he's a rung down from Durant's regular season efficiency, but he's an underrated passer and playmaker capable of setting up teammates out of pick and roll action, and his off-ball movement and shooting help him fit well next to ball-dominant players like Russell Westbrook. With Russ on the bench and no help, George pushed OKC to a 108 offensive rating, slightly below the league's average of 110. With Westbrook on the court, that number jumped up to a solid 114 points per 100. Of course, George is an elite wing defender too, and with a near 7-foot wingspan, he's arguably the game's best at clogging and jumping passing lanes. This makes him an incredibly versatile defender. He was just one of 7 players to guard positions 1 through 4 for at least 800 possessions this year per Second Spectrum matchup data. This shows up in impact metrics where George graded out as one of the 20 most impactful defenders in every major one-number metric, which combined with strong offense painted him as one of the most valuable players in the NBA. George could easily be 10th, and I see an outside argument for him cracking the next group and possibly even being as high as number 7, given how close together some of the players are. Still, that's looking at Paul through my rosiest glasses, and I'm most comfortable with him at 9 or 10. At number 8, it's Joel Embiid. Embiid is a monster low-post scorer, blending power and skill around the basket for offense, and like behemoths of the past, he adds value with his offensive rebounding and foul drawing around the rim, but his playmaking and decision-making are problematic, limiting that offensive value. To put Embiid's scoring into perspective, I adjusted prior big man seasons for inflation and compared them to Joel's 2019, where he finished 3rd in the NBA in scoring rate at around 29 points per 75 possessions on positive efficiency. That's similar to 1982 Moses Malone and slightly behind Shaq in 1996 and Ewing in 1990. Of course, Embiid shines on defense, where his rim protection makes him an outside candidate for Defensive Player of the Year, and he would be a strong candidate for the league's best overall defender if he were slightly more mobile or active on the perimeter and in switching and pick and pop situations. Embiid's two-way impact has a major value in Philly, where a lack of big man depth makes him one of the most valuable guys in the league. Given some of my reservations about his offensive game and fitting in with other star players, I can see the argument for him being at the back of the George Jokic group at number 10. On the other hand, giving him the benefit of the doubt would land him at 7th this year, and if I'm forced to choose, I'd take a healthy Embiid's defense and scoring over Jokic's offensive quarterbacking, although Embiid's not always healthy. More on that in a moment. Moving along at number 7 is James Harden, who continues to improve every year, mastering the step-back 3 this year, while adding a floater. As I detailed earlier in the season, he produced one of the greatest scoring years in NBA history, but his regular season and playoff efficiency are not the same. When stacking up box score changes from regular to postseason, Harden loses more ground than arguably any prominent star ever, where opponents can prep for his foul baiting and game plan for his tendencies. He's a one-man offense, yes, but this is only unlocked when he dominates the basketball, which has diminishing returns if paired with other elite talent. While Harden is an elite pick-and-roll passer, his performance dip in the playoffs brings down some of that playmaking, and as a result, Houston's postseason offensive ratings have lagged far behind their regular season effectiveness. The Rockets' relative playoff offense this year was plus 3.3, right in line with its 3-year performance, and that's a pretty significant drop given those regular season numbers. Of course, Harden's defense continues to be a major issue too. His post-up and steal numbers have been frequently cited as wins for him on that front, and I do think his defense is better now than it was 2 or 3 years ago, but those numbers overlook a lot of context. Harden gambles a lot, and so while he racks up some steals, he pays a major tax on the ones he misses. According to the Second Spectrum matchup data, Wings shot better than expected against Harden, and most of his matchups scored at a higher rate than against the average defensive shooting guard. Harden still finished near the top of the league in major impact metrics in the playoffs, but box plus minus is less sensitive to defense and might be overrating Harden a touch because of it. I actually don't see a lot of wiggle room with the beard. I'm not entirely comfortable with dropping him back to 8th, and I feel similarly about moving him into the top 4. Both feel like a stretch based on how I stack up his impact. At number 6 is LeBron James. That feels weird. LeBron is especially difficult to rank this year because he has 2 competing forces acting against each other. The first one is age. He's more ground-based than ever, his foot speed is slowed, and he's more susceptible to injury. Recovery is also harder after heavy playoff minutes. On the other hand, playoff LeBron is a real thing. James has vastly outperformed his regular season numbers in the last few years, where his offense has been historically good in the second season. Without actually seeing it, it's hard to know how this would play out, and I think we'll have a slightly better idea after seeing him next year, but for now I'm more comfortable playing this on the conservative side. Even with his groin injury, James still finished the season as one of the league's most prolific scorers and playmakers. His defense was a major question mark through the year, although I explored that in detail earlier this season and see him as a slightly positive on that end still, which is consistent with most major impact metrics. They view LeBron as a top 10 level regular season player, but again, it's an unknown how much better playoff LeBron would be. I could very easily have him 4th or even 3rd on this list by viewing LeBron as closer to his 2018 self. Of course, if LeBron breaks my brain and posts a monster 2020, he might retrospectively challenge for the top spot on this list. Just ahead of LeBron at number 5, boy this is impossible, is Kawhi Leonard, who has become an incredible isolation scorer over the last few years. He's a deadly outside shooter too, and the last few postseasons he's become one of the great scorers in league history. In his last 3 playoffs, Kawhi's combination of scoring volume and efficiency sits among the great bucket getters ever when adjusting for opponent defensive quality. And his shot making was exactly what Toronto needed, upgrading from DeMar DeRozan, one of the least efficient primary scorers in modern playoff history, to one of the most efficient in Leonard. Kawhi's ability to rain pull-up jumpers from various spots raises the floor for his team's offense, but all of that ball pounding and isolationism wouldn't necessarily carry the same value as the centerpiece of a great offense. His profile is closer to players like Bernard King and George Gervin than to offensive engines like LeBron or Kobe, and big scorers like this who don't punish double teams have never made NBA offenses great. If you're wondering, the Raptors' defense has been historically good in the playoffs this year. Through Game 5 of the Finals, Toronto has authored one of the greatest defensive clinics since the merger, holding teams nearly 9 points below their regular offensive rating, a mark only topped by the legendary 2004 Pistons defense among deep playoff runs. While Kawhi is a fantastic on-ball defender, I see him as more of a cog in this wheel than the primary driver. Defensive studs like Marc Gasol and Pascal Siakam have played huge roles in schemes that coach Nick Nurse has cooked up. Meanwhile, the Raptors' offense hasn't been too much better than its previous incarnations with DeRozan, posting a relative playoff offense of plus 1.4, up from minus 1.2 over the last 5 years. Kawhi's scoring does allow for more defensive-heavy lineups, which is the perfect fit for his floor-raising style. Impact metrics paint him as an elite playoff performer who falls just short of the game's very best, and I think stronger playmaking or more involved defense would bring him to the top of the heap. PIPM, which incorporates Toronto's performance with and without Kawhi, views Leonard as the team's 6th best postseason defender, largely because his man defense is way ahead of his team defense, and heavy lifting on offense takes its toll on the defensive end. If I squint, I see the argument for Kawhi that takes him as high as 3rd, although that feels like a bit of a stretch to me. On the other hand, a slightly lower valuation could easily bring him down to number 7. This is the hardest year ever, why did I do this? Moving along at number 4 is Anthony Davis, and this might be a controversial selection, but for the purpose of this exercise, I'm ignoring all the off-court stuff. Things got really weird at the end of January after his trade request, but using numbers up until that point, Davis was a monster, placing 7th in scoring rate in the NBA on strong efficiency and drastically upping his playmaking from last season. And that playmaking is the big deal to me. Davis stacks up against the very best scoring playmaking bigs in history with this added dimension that's been missing, posting numbers in line with legendary seasons from David Robinson and Kevin Garnett. Davis hit cutters and spearheaded more offense off the dribble this year, and the versatility of his post moves and all-time level lob finishing helped him post similar numbers in last year's playoffs. Of course, AD is a high-level defender who flashes Defensive Player of the Year potential. I do have some gripes about his mobility at times or his awareness and engagement on that end, and I don't think we've seen him max out on defense yet. He was 17th in defensive PIPM at the end of January, enough to make him look like a strong candidate for the game's best player, according to the major impact metrics. And after a while, we just have to acknowledge the broad strokes in New Orleans. In the last 2 years, the Pels have the margin of victory of a 45-win team with Davis in the lineup, but in the 33 games he's missed, New Orleans has played like a 29-win team. This kind of lift is historically in line with strong MVP players. There's still enough uncertainty around Davis's defensive ceiling and the exact value of that offense that I can easily see him down at 6 this year, but my hunch is we look back on him in a year or two as an absolute stud. I'm flipping a coin between Davis and my number 3, and if anything, I actually see a good argument for Anthony Davis as the best player in the game right now. At number 3 is a player I feel far more confident evaluating, Kevin Durant. Durant's one of the greatest scorers in league history, finishing in the top 20 in the league in points per possession and efficiency this year. He's also become a competent playmaker over the years, although the cushy confines of Golden State slightly overstate those passing numbers. I've detailed how he doesn't drive the Warriors' offense, but it's always been a testament to his absurd skill as a shooter and scorer that he arrived and made the Warriors even better. He just produced arguably the greatest mid-range shooting season on record, making an incredible 52% of his shots between 10 and 23 feet. That's the highest percentage from at least 200 attempts in over a decade. Durant's man defense is quite good when he can set himself up against face-up players on the wing, and that's why he does so well against forwards like Danilo Gallinari. But I didn't love his help defense this year and thought he wasn't quite as active in that facet of the game. And composite metrics all view him as a slight positive on D, enough to make him a clear top 5 player in these stats and a candidate for the game's best. If I were slightly more confident in his help defense, I'd probably have him second or even first, but when forced to choose, Durant goes third this year. Number 2 is the Greek freak Giannis Antetokounmpo, who had a monster regular season. He was second in the league in scoring rate while finishing 9th in efficiency, a testament to his incredible finishing around the hoop, where he posted a Shaq-like 74% at the rim. And his regular season excellence led to a dominant portfolio of impact metrics, the kind typically seen among historically great players who separate themselves from the pack. But in this case, his passing limitations and lack of scoring versatility were exploited brilliantly by Toronto's elite defense employing those Giannis rules. But I'm conscious about overreacting to this. Even with it, it was a razor-close series against an incredible defense in which Giannis still created a bunch of shots for his teammates. Looking at those same impact metrics in the postseason, he no longer looks historically great, but he still looks like a candidate for the league's best player, and a lot of that is his defense. I see no argument for Giannis as a top 4 offensive player, but he's one of the best defenders in the league, and that's massive for me. He continued his active and timely paint protection in the playoffs, he's switchable on that end, and even fought through some screens in the postseason. As a result, Giannis and Joel Embiid led the playoffs in defensive PIPM, and Milwaukee, like Toronto, held its playoff opponents about 9 points below their regular season efficiency. I can easily entertain the argument for Antetokounmpo as number 1, and I can see the argument for him being as low as 4th. And at number 1, that leaves Steph Curry. Curry finished in the top 10 in both scoring volume and efficiency this year, but what really separates him as an offensive weapon is his shooting and constant calculating movement. This serves to warp defenses into knots like no other player we've seen. And it makes Curry compatible with any teammates. His gravity is present when he's the focus of an offense or when he's a secondary valve. With Curry on the court this year, Golden State scored a mind-boggling 121 points per 100 possessions, higher than any player in the league. He and Durant overlap minutes, but in the last 3 years, it's been clear that Curry is the driver of these offensive heights, reaching league-best levels even before incorporating Durant into the equation. What's even crazier is that with KD on the bench, Curry ups his scoring volume to levels only touched by Kobe Bryant and James Harden in the last 30 years, but on efficiency better than either of them. This is why Impact Metrics regularly views Steph as the game's premier offensive player and one of the best overall players in the league. He does enough on defense here that he's often viewed as a positive on that end, and despite his size, Steph uses positioning well to rotate or take away passing lanes. He can also be a pest on the ball against some smaller guards, and while he has absolutely no paint presence, he held every position below its scoring average against point guards, according to Second Spectrum matchup data. In the playoffs, Curry's seen a slight dip in efficiency after slumping out of the gate, whether that was from injuries like his finger dislocation suffered in Game 2 against Houston, or just bad luck. Steph has replicated that non-Durant play with KD out, and the Warriors have posted a plus 4.3 relative offense in that span, which ranks first among playoff teams. That is amazing to me given their lack of offensive depth right now. I agree with those metrics that view Curry as, at worst, a neutral defender, and that's enough to elevate him to the top of the impact metrics in the postseason. Given the number of years he's done this, and the overwhelming evidence for how game-changing his offense is, it's actually hard for me to see an argument that he drops below second here without boosting up some of the other contenders as well. Now, despite watching more basketball than is doctor recommended, I'm still only one person. Really smart groups will come up with more accurate estimates, and one such group is a 14-person panel over at NBA Math. They were kind enough to share their results with me for this video. Despite compiling my list in a dark cave, they ended up with similar results, and most notably, the same top 10 players. Anthony Davis is down at 8 for them, Jokic up to 7th, Giannis and Curry tied for 1st, and Kawhi Leonard did receive a first-place vote. I also asked the writers at Nylon Calculus to rank their top players this year, and they bumped Paul George for Damian Lillard, while also moving Jokic up. I've included the vote share at the bottom of the screen to help demonstrate closeness. Curry was close to receiving all first-place votes with a share of 94%, and they had a pretty clear top 6, where, interestingly, LeBron and James Harden were the only other players to receive first-place votes. Giving LeBron James a larger benefit of the doubt is perfectly reasonable to me, but LeBron was injured this year, something I didn't ask the Nylon analysts to take into account. But if I were to adjust for health, my top 10 players list would look like this. Most notably, Embiid's knee issue and lack of full health in the playoffs drop him below Jokic for me, and Paul George's shoulder injury was dangerously close to dropping him out of the top 10. Kevin Durant's missed time in the later rounds actually destroys most of his championship equity, which makes room for a new member of the top 10. Kyrie Irving would probably have it, except his off-court issues actually bled into his on-court value this year. This spot could also go to defensive titans like Rudy Gobert or Draymond Green, but if I had to pick, I'd give the nod to Lillard. So there you have it, a look at the very best players in the NBA in 2019. I'm interested to know what your list looks like after watching this video. Also, many people to thank: NBA Math, all the great analysts at Nylon Calculus, including Krishna Narsu, who helped compile a lot of the matchup data, and Crumpled Jumper for providing all the player bobbleheads featured in this video. If you want to support this channel, you can use that Dollar Shave Club link. It helps a lot. Also, check out the Thinking Basketball podcast, or even become a patron and receive some perks over at patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. Hope you enjoyed the 2019 season and that you're having a great day.